special broadcast. In this little special session, we have with us none other than the man behind Three Idiots, the inspiration behind Three Idiots, and someone who's led the Boycott China initiative from the front. Again, I'd like to call him the brainchild behind the Boycott China movement. We're talking about none other than Sonam Wangchuk, who happens to be a serial innovator all the way from the Far East. So yes, many thanks, Mr. Sonam Wangchuk, for joining us. I hope the audio line is clear.
Yes. Hi.
So, sir, it is indeed a privilege speaking to you. My first question is as to how you feel about the way in which Indians have responded to your clarion call of boycotting China. It was your brainchild, and now it is taking a nice shape. Every house across the country is literally talking about this movement. How do you feel about the way in which Indians have reacted to your boycott China call?
Well, I think a better time to ask would be a year later, because right now, because of the incident, I see a lot of emotional reactions, but I'm not very impressed with those. Generally, the people have responded very well, but it should not remain a burst of emotions for 1 or 2 days. That won't take us anywhere. Definitely not throwing things and breaking things and burning things. That's not good for resources also, although I respect and understand the sentiments. But what we need is a sustained behavior change of not patronizing goods, products coming from a regime that is exploitative, that is a rogue regime which bullies around and, you know, does a lot of harm to the world. So a better time to ask the question will be next year if we have continued this sentiment long term. I'm looking more for a middle path, not a burst of anger and then gone, nor nothing, but something in between.
In fact, that is the very reason why we've called this little special broadcast as Boycott China. It's a long haul indeed, because it is going to, it has to sustain for a while in such a way that it really causes some real impact on ground. So my next question is on that very line as to how practical is it to really boycott China at every single level, and what are the kind of alternatives that India can really come up with? What would your cornerstone be on this regard?
So, practical, if you ask, the action so far in just 2 weeks, we can see it's having a huge effect already. China is reacting and overreacting. It's sometimes blocking ads on Twitter for Amul. It's pressuring Google to remove apps. Its editorials in the Global Time sometimes says Indians cannot boycott Chinese products, they love it too much, and then now it says you should not associate border incidents with boycott Chinese products. So when they say too much, you understand that it's having an effect, otherwise they wouldn't have bothered to react. So it is having a great effect, therefore we should continue. This is the best response, more than military. Economic response is what China understands best. And as for practicality, I think it is quite practical, but in slightly longer term. Maybe tomorrow or day after tomorrow or few days, weeks, we may have some inconveniences. But that's always true when you go for change. Change is always a little painful in the beginning, particularly addictions like drugs, you have withdrawal symptoms. Cancer treatment, you have painful surgeries. But you take this all because then you will be free and healthy again, happy and healthy. So likewise, India unfortunately was carried away too far on its dependence on Chinese goods. It was like some addiction. Now we are trying to remove it. It may cause a bit of inconvenience for some time. But if we sustain it for 2 to 3 years, I really want to say that whatever sentiments you have today, ask yourself, can you keep it for 3 years? Then I can guarantee there will be huge reforms within China if we can keep it on and take some inconvenience. Anything you do in life, you do have some inconvenience, and that's all. And in 1 or 2 years, there'll be a lot of um, new alternatives coming up. Industry needs some time. So you give that 1 or 2 years, don't make it a 24-hour thing. Um, but then in 2 years, you will have all kinds of things. And it is also one of the greatest opportunities for enterprises inside India. It's like an opportunity on a platter to fill in the vacuum. People are after you, asking you for products. The least you can do is rise to this occasion. So
Mr.
it's a
Sunam,
great
yes.
thing in many ways, which in a year or two will lead to many, many good things.
Mr. Sonam, listening to you, it is almost very clear as to how this is something that should have happened a lot earlier. But again, cutting to present, I would like to go back to another point that you had made a little while ago. You were speaking about how there is clear anger. Yes, there is. The entire country knows about it. But the secret really lies in as to how we convert this anger into some sort of a plausible result, especially into economic boost, not just for the Indians, and ensure that we give a response to China through the wallet. That is what you had advocated. So how do we really tap into this anger and ensure that there is real result on ground?
For the moment, it's good to kickstart the movement, but it will be very important that it is sustained, as I said, over time. So, yeah, it's understandable and in some ways good that there is such sentiments right now, but it won't help much if it fades away in few days. So something like a middle path is what we need to choose, not a outburst of emotions for a day, nor total callousness, insensitivity forever, but something medium and middle path for a long time, and that's what will bear results.
Now, Mr. Sunam, as you rightly pointed out, there is clearly an opportunity that companies right here in India, MSMEs for that matter, have at this point in time, given the fact that there is an anti-China sentiment. So there is a need to capitalize on that. But you have companies like Maruti and Bajaj coming out and saying that the Boycott China initiative will not really work out, given the fact that there is not too much of FDI, and most of these automobile companies, for example, have a lot of Chinese components. So how do you deal with a situation like that, where you have components, small components being manufactured across the world pretty much, and then they're assembled? So how do we really ensure that we are completely devoid of China? Isn't obviously an overnight process. So how do you like to react to companies like Bajaj, of course, and Maruti, who are saying that this is not possible?
Well, we should understand that we have time on our side. Nothing says that we have to do it in 36 hours. So give them 1 to 2 years to adapt, adjust, and source from alternative places. And if people continue to insist that if you don't have a change, if you don't change in 1 to 2 years also, then we'll definitely patronize other suppliers. You know, it's customers who rule the roost, not suppliers. So
Correct.
customer is the king, and whichever company will have to adjust, or else they'll see their business going. So there are many reasons. It should not be just because of the incidents on the border that we say we won't buy Chinese. You know, it's also because why Chinese goods are cheap. There's a story behind it. There's a reason. You know, it's exploitation of human rights, labor rights, nature, exploitation of natural resources, manipulation of currency, artificial subsidies. All these things make Chinese goods cheap. Now, if we are only about price tags, then we should not be saying don't buy things with child labor. We should not have succeeded in discarding goods that have to do with cruelty to animals. But today we have succeeded with all these things, and therefore now we should start seeing Chinese products as products associated with violations and exploitation of human and natural world. And therefore, people should not go for just the price tag. And we have done it with our wallets, with many such incidents that examples that I gave.
Indeed. Mr. Sonam, you also say that customer is the king. So talking about the Indian customer, can an Indian customer really resist buying Chinese goods simply because they are dirt cheap at this point in time? You were speaking about how, why it is so cheap. You were speaking about how these products are manufactured in China. So doesn't there seem to be a need for larger awareness in the Indian population so that people across the country know as to why these goods are cheap and how they're really manufactured, to somewhere down the line at least shift their perception and shift their fancy from the Chinese goods despite the fact that they're cheap? So how do you target that?
That's what I'm doing through this awareness and campaign, that it should be to do with what they are doing, where your money goes to sponsor the bullying and pushiness of the neighbor here. Your cousins, your brothers are dying on the border. You definitely don't want to be a part of that system. So finally, the choice will be people's. I just generally say that we need to not only find alternatives all the time, but we should also look at living simpler lives where cheap goods from China do not fill your houses. It's not about just buying and buying and buying from whichever country. It should also be about living a simpler life and being happier, like we learned during the lockdowns, that it doesn't take too many material goods for us to be happy. So if we buy fewer but from better, cleaner sources, we can be very happy. And this our country will have to understand if it doesn't want to have repeats of such incidents. It's like a bait, you know. A bait is a bait. It may look tasty, juicy, whatever. Finally, you become a slave. It's coated with sugar of the price tag, but it has this bait of killing all the industry around and then monopolizing. This is how China works. If you don't understand or do not act even after understanding, then you were destined to be a slave. Maybe nothing can help you.
Very well put, Mr. Sonam. Again, another thought just flashed my mind as to how our festivals, most of our festivals, are literally run based on what comes in from China. Right from Ganesh Chaturthi to Diwali, the crackers and the idols, they're all sourced out of China. So, how do you feel about the state of affairs, the way in which we're celebrating our festivals? There's an obvious case where we can produce these requirements or elements right here in the country, but we're still having to depend on China for this. So how do you feel about the situation on ground pertaining to festivals, so to speak?
Well, if you go by the sentiments that make people break their television sets and burn their gadgets, then you wouldn't think that small things like lights for festivals should be an issue. And therefore I think that we should adopt a middle path of sustenance rather than small bursts of anger. Thank you.
Right, many thanks, Mr. Sonam. But before I let you go, one last question. I'd like you to really throw a few comments on what has been transpiring between India and China at the line of actual control. That has obviously irked you and everyone around you. So what are your thoughts and your final message to the people across the state and the country listening to you as to how do you take Boycott China forward? Your final message.
I don't know if I understood your question, but I think military response is what China is looking for. That's what they want, so that they can fool their citizens into believing that there is threat from outside and they should stay silent when they are very frustrated and want a revolution. So the response really should be national. And at this point of time, China will be more affected if citizens of India join together to give a joint economic response and inspire the world to do the same. Such changes are very infectious. You know how the Arab Spring caught from one country to another, toppling governments just because of the call of a vegetable seller. So similarly, if we in our country take this forward, there are lots of people around the world who have the same frustration with this regime.
Many thanks, Mr. Sonam,
you.
for joining us. It's been a busy schedule, I'm sure, but thank you for taking your time out and speaking to us. That was Sonam Wangchuk, the innovator, the man behind, the inspiration behind the movie Three Idiots, and of course, the spearhead of the Boycott China campaign, telling us as to how this has to be a concerted effort, and that it is something that should go on for a longer period, at least for a year or two, to really ensure that we see those results, those responses, those reactions, those results on the ground when it comes to how we go about boycotting China. In fact, that's the need of the hour. That's also the larger sentiment. But yes, as Sonam Wangchuk, the innovator, rightly himself put, it is not about those bursts of anger. It is about how do we capitalize on that and how do we ensure that the sentiment is strong for an extended period of time so that there is some real result on the ground. I'd like to leave this little interaction on that note, and yes, many thanks for joining us on this brief interaction. If you've liked the video, do not forget to share and make sure your friends know all about what has been transpiring between India and China and what we as citizens of the country, responsible citizens of the country, can really do and ensure that there is a befitting reply to China. Do not forget to share this video, and yes, ensure that you subscribe to all of our social media platforms, all the way from Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, and Facebook. This is your host, Adarsh Vepachedu, signing off.